Well, good morning. Good morning from St. Bart's in Midtown Manhattan. My name is Peter Thompson, and whether you are here in person on Park Avenue or you're joining us online, it is my joy and delight to welcome you to the Forum, where each week we have sacred conversations about the things that matter. And this morning our topic is bishops. We're about to elect a new bishop coadjutor of New York, and we have asked our own bishop and our rector to speak about bishops and their role in the church as we prepare to elect a new leader for the diocese. So thank you, Dean, for sitting in the chair this week.
Sure. The real reason is it's really hard to get a speaker on Thanksgiving weekend. But I'm delighted to talk about this because on the eve of the election of the next bishop of New York, it seemed appropriate to discuss why we have bishops and what they're supposed to do. Of course, the role has changed over the years quite a bit, but some things remain the same. And I'm delighted to have the chancellor of the diocese. So if I misspeak, Alice, you can help me out. Alice Shirk, who's a member of our parish and serves as the chancellor for the Diocese of New York, which is like the attorney for the diocese. Well, it's kind of funny that so many lifelong Episcopalians don't really know very much about our polity. I think we have to blame the clergy for that error, although I'm not sure I knew a whole lot about bishops before I became one. Let's see what the next slide is. And so, what is a bishop? A brief introduction. The word bishop originally comes from the Greek word epi, which means over or around, and scopus, meaning seer. So an episcopos is literally an overseer or a superintendent or an inspector. And we find mention of bishops in the Bible. Different centers of authority, we don't think about this, but the Congregational Church, the kind of locus for authority is in the congregation. There's a lot of independence in United Church of Christ, Congregationalist congregations. The Presbyterian Church, the presbyter, the elder, and the gathering of presbyters, the presbytery is their center for authority. And then in the Episcopal Church, the episcopacy or the bishop. Although we don't see bishops very often, the average Episcopalian only lays eyes on a bishop when he or she is coming for confirmation, and that usually happens every year or every 2 years. Some experienced Episcopalians look for when confirmations will take place and make sure they will avoid that Sunday, but usually when the bishop comes, the bishop will also then, after the service, meet with the vestry and the rector and clergy and just check in to see how things are going. So there are 7 scriptural references to bishops in the New Testament. This is the list. So Episcopalians didn't really make this up. There is some scriptural basis for our form of polity. In 1 Timothy, it says, "The saying is sure, whoever aspires to the office of bishop desires a noble task." Now, a bishop must be above reproach, married only once, and I just hasten to add that in Greek, that means the husband of one wife. We don't allow or the wife of one husband, I guess, in our tradition. Temperate, sensible, dignified, hospitable, an apt teacher. You all can tell me how that goes. Not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well, keeping his children submissive. My son loved this. And respectful in every way, for if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how can he take care of God's church? So that's just a little outline of what in the early church they expected from bishops. In Titus, a bishop, God's steward. must be blameless, must not be arrogant or quick-tempered. It's so interesting how even in the early days they knew what to anticipate from bishops. Addicted to wine, violent or greedy for gain, but he must be hospitable, a lover of goodness, prudent, upright, devout, and self-controlled. No wonder we have such trouble finding people for these positions. The bishop must have a firm grasp of the word that is trustworthy in accordance with the teaching so that he may be able to both preach with sound doctrine and to refute those who contradict it. So, a little more. Must be a recent convert, may be puffed up with conceit. If he's too recent a convert, he hasn't had a chance for the faith to kind of fall down and dwell in him. And of course, in these days, when this was written, all bishops were men, but I think probably men and women would agree that these are a difficult list to make through. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders so that he may not fall into disgrace and the snare of the devil. So it's pretty clear what they were looking for, and in some ways, if you read the description created by the committee to elect a new bishop in the Diocese of New York, you'd find a lot of similarities in the profile they created to these things. They're not as overt about not wanting someone addicted to alcohol, or they're a little smoother about those things. But those are all things that they look for when they are looking to put together a slate of nominees for bishop. Now, the role of bishops has changed throughout history. The prince bishops of England held enormous secular power, and our current Archbishop of Canterbury was once a Prince Bishop of England. He was the Bishop of Durham, and as you go into the little town of Durham, there's a sign that says "Home of the Prince Bishops," which his kids would tease him about unmercifully. But those bishops back in the day held really royal powers. They had the ability to to mint their own coinage. They had their own armies. It was a tremendously powerful office to hold in terms of socio-political power, economic power, even military power. So this made, here's a little picture of the small little cottage they call home in Durham. This is the cathedral there, quite beautiful, and probably some of you have visited it. It's quite an extraordinary place. So as the Anglican Church extends missionaries to the United States, they're worried about this. They're trying to put off a king as one ruler. They don't want bishops as a substitute ruler, and they wanted to make sure that the office of the bishop didn't hold that kind of power. So for one thing, they began electing bishops, not only with representatives of the clerical order, but with lay representatives. That's not how it's done in England or actually anywhere else in the Anglican Communion. I just thought these are the kind of people that were worried. I found this picture. Don't they look worried? They look very self-satisfied and Anglican. I don't know who they are, but they look like they would have fit the role there. So I'm sorry that you can't see this better. This was given to me actually when I was a priest by a congregational minister who thought it was very funny because it's a political cartoon about an attempt to land a bishop in America. And so I don't know if you can see, these guys have poles and they're pushing the boat off of the shore. And this poor man is hanging here, looks like he's a bishop in Tippett, and he's saying, "Now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace." And these people are saying, "No Lord, spiritual or temporal, in New England. Liberty and freedom of conscience." These guys are not excited. And this is a problem that we still see today with every diocese has an apportionment formula. They're anticipating that when they see, shall they be obliged to maintain bishops that cannot maintain themselves? So there was an early concern about this, and it's just funny. I think neither the friend who gave this to me nor I had any idea I'd be a bishop, but it's the perfect thing to keep in the study, you know. So what do bishops do anyway? Let's see. The Book of Common Prayer has the ordinal for bishops, priests, deacons, and let's take a look at what it says. So bishops are to be one with the apostles in proclaiming Christ's resurrection and interpreting the gospel and testifying to Christ's sovereignty as Lord of lords and King of kings. Guard the faith, unity, and discipline of the church. Celebrate and provide for the administration of the sacrament of the new covenant. Ordain priests and deacons and join in ordaining bishops. It takes 3 bishops to lay hands on a person who is a candidate for bishop for them to be ordained. Be in all things a faithful pastor and a wholesome example for the entire flock of Christ. And share with fellow bishops in the leadership of the church throughout the world. I love the prayer book language because it's quite beautiful at this point. And as a bishop, I guess I've been to countless ordinations of other bishops. So every time I hear this, it sticks with me. Your heritage is the faith of patriarchs, prophets, apostles, and martyrs, and those of every generation who have looked to God in hope. Your joy will be to follow him who came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. So that's what bishops are supposed to do. Now, what do they really do? Well, they pray. They really pray, and if they weren't people of prayer before they are elected bishop, they become people of prayer very soon thereafter. There's nothing like using all of your best skills, using all your best resources, bringing everything you have to a position and realizing that it's not enough. It's not unlike being the rector of St. BART'S, and St. BART'S, by the way, is a larger congregation than several dioceses, so I just throw that in for fun. Bishops oversee, supervise, advise, coach, cajole, encourage, and occasionally discipline the clergy. A friend of mine, when he became bishop, he said he had spent his entire ministry working in the church, and he had met all of these really highly motivated, very gifted people who were his colleagues in the priesthood. And then he became a bishop, and he said, and then I met everybody else. And so there are always in every diocese a group of clergy who find it difficult to hold a position for various reasons, and bishops have a responsibility for pastorally caring for them and trying to find out where they can exercise the ministry. Most bishops would say that the discipline part of the episcopacy is their least favorite part. I'm sure Alice would concur. That's a very difficult thing when clergy violate boundaries and you're forced to make decisions that will affect the congregation, their livelihood, and their future. The church, I think, went from a period of time where it was sort of don't ask, don't tell, to a much more aware period of time. And I feel good about where the church has been in terms of protecting the congregations that clergy serve. I once did a confirmation, and I asked people, a group of adults before the service, so why did you become an Episcopalian? And this one woman raised her hand, and I said, yes. And she said, because of you. And I said, I don't think we've met. And she said, oh, no, not because of you personally, but I made a decision that I would never be a part of a church that had no oversight over the clergy. I thought that was very interesting. We take it for granted. It's sort of the way we do things. But everybody is held accountable. And there's a check and balance system that we put in place in the church in the United States, and now we're in 11 other countries. But we really wanted to make sure that the bishop couldn't act in an imperial manner. So there's a standing committee of lay and ordained people that are a check and balance on the bishop. There are canons in the wider church that are a check and balance on the bishop. So we were concerned about that early on. Modern bishops raise money. It's an important part of the ministry. Only the bishop in some places can make the ask, and so that's an important part, an increasingly important part of the episcopacy. They plan strategically, and they serve as a vision bearer for the diocese. They recruit, hire, and oversee the diocesan staff. That's a big job in New York. We have the largest diocesan staff in the Episcopal Church. We're serving some 46,000 people. I think there are some 500 people on the canonically resident in the Diocese of New York. So these are big responsibilities for bishops and their teams. The ability to put together a team is a crucial part of being a good bishop. Stephanie's in the room, so I can say, Michael Curry, our presiding bishop, one of the things that I thought he did brilliantly early in his ministry was put together a great team. And it gave everybody a lot of confidence that once you can put together a team like that, you can do the job. So bishops they speak to the issues of the day by teaching, preaching, writing, increasingly using social media. That's an important part of everyone's ministry now. One of the things that I was told, and I think is true, wherever the bishop goes, there's a light that follows the bishop. And so if the bishop makes a trip to the jail, suddenly a lot of attention is focused on the care for people who are incarcerated. If the bishop visits a homeless shelter, there's suddenly a lot more attention brought to the homeless, those who are hungry, and we ask our presiding bishop to travel around the world, really doing that kind of work, networking with other parts of the Anglican Communion, and also shining a light on needs not only at home but abroad. So here's the group that's going to be voting on the bishop. Miriam Schneider, who's our hardworking warden and present here today. Joe Bessie, who's a vestry member, an experienced clinician. Craig Simmons, a vestry member, a businessman, and very active in the church. And so, Craig, are you here? You're here, you're right next door. Good. And so these are going to be the lay people that vote, and then the ordained people in our parish who have a vote are, I'm canonically resident here, Meredith is, Canon Andrew Mullins is, and then our deacon, John Wyrenius. That was a big issue, by the way, giving deacons the vote, and some lay people thought that that would kind of throw out of balance the clerical and lay balance. You might ask why Peter Thompson is not voting, because he's canonically resident in Connecticut, and he voted in that election and elected a very fine bishop in Connecticut. And Zach also is still resident in the Diocese of Atlanta, so they hold their residencies there. So here are the candidates. Oh my goodness. Pray for these people. This is a big job. The Diocese of New York is one of the flagship dioceses in the Episcopal Church. The Reverend Matthew Foster Hyde is a rector at at Heavenly Rest here in Manhattan. He's served in a variety of settings, including Trinity Wall Street. He's a leader of the Episcopal Parish Network. He favors structural change in the diocese and has talked about that. The Reverend Matthew Mead in the middle is the rector of Christ Church Pelham. He's experienced on diocesan committees, most certainly the finance committee. He's a lifelong Episcopalian with a lot of experience in the diocese. The Reverend Stephanie Johnson is an advocate for the smaller churches in the diocese. She's a rector of St. Paul's Church and Day School in Riverside. She lives in the Hudson River Valley as an eco-justice advocate. And the Reverend Stephen Polikis, did I get that right? Polikis is the rector of All Saints Park Slope, Brooklyn. He's grown a parish in Brooklyn, expresses a passion for social justice, has a positive stewardship approach. And the Reverend Jamon Taylor is the rector of St. Ambrose in Raleigh, North Carolina. He's the only person who's kind of not in the region. And Jamon I know because he was an associate rector at St. Michael and All Angels in Dallas, Texas, where I served. He was there after I had left. He has previous life experience as an engineer for Michelin, experience raising money in a capital campaign, and recently won the Sewanee 2022 Service Award for work in the neighborhood. Each one of these candidates is a gifted priest. Each one of them has made a sacrifice in offering themselves for service. It's a very vulnerable and very public place to put oneself. It's not like being a rector where there's a group of people who are candidates, one is selected, and no one knows in your congregation that you were applying for another position. Here, everybody knows. One person will be elected, and 4 people will have to go back to their congregations and say, I really loved you first and best. And I just feel like the Spirit apparently did not call me to this. And I think it's been said that we need to be more careful, and that some of our very best clergy are nominated for these positions, become candidates, and then only one out of a group of excellent priests will be elected. And the care of those people who are not elected is considerable. It's a hard thing to put everything out there on the line and then to feel like, well, people did not want what I had to offer. It's hard to remember that it's a call and not a popular political election, because it sometimes feels like that, and we use election language. But if we really believe that the Holy Spirit is involved in this, we'll have a different approach. Okay, so somebody asked me what I was interested in voting for a new bishop. I try to look at faithfulness, what kinds of things in their documents. Everyone writes a long piece about what they think is most important and tries to describe their theological position, and that's all available on the Diocese of New York's website under the search for a new bishop. But faithfulness is, I think, the core thing that I'm looking for to somebody who's going to guard the faith. The second thing, and in New York, I'm more concerned about this than I am about almost anything else, and it's having a clear vision for the future and the ability to see that there's a radical restructuring needed in the diocese. This is my own personal view of this. This may not be shared by others, but I will say that the apportionment schedule in the Diocese of New York is really hard on large churches, and Bishop Dici spoke about that at the last diocesan convention. That means that a parish like St. Bart's is expected to give 20 cents on every dollar back to the diocese, and to add on to that, any air rights sales, 10% of those go to the diocese. So that's not something that every diocese around the country is doing, and more dioceses are paring down diocesan staffs and finding, I think, more effective ways to serve the congregations. Experience, this is a big old ship, and so I look at people who've had some experience in working in large churches. I think that's helpful. What are their gifts? Can they articulate clearly? Do they seem joyful? Are they good preachers, teachers? And the last thing is hard to judge, but durability. You want in a bishop, actually you want in any clergy, the ability to take a licking and keep on ticking. There's a lot of conflict in ordained ministry, and nobody ever goes into the ordained ministry thinking, what I'm really looking forward to is dealing with a lot of conflict. But conflict is a part of church life. It's a part of community life. It's also more a part of the kind of stress and strain that you see when a church is under economic pressure, just like St. Bart's is, and really every church. I don't know of any church that doesn't feel the pinch of the pandemic, doesn't feel the pinch of declining attendance and membership. So the Diocese of New York says, theologically, bishops are considered to be successors to the apostles. Bishops, therefore, have twofold responsibility for the apostolic mission of the church and for the oversight of that mission within a given geographic area. The Diocese of New York, interestingly, doesn't actually have all of New York in it. The Diocese of Long Island actually has, Long Island, Brooklyn, Queens, and so the Diocese of New York has Manhattan and Staten Island and the Bronx.
And 6 other counties.
And then up the Hudson River Valley, 6 other counties. So one of the things the bishop has to mediate here is you've got people who never leave New York City and think it's all about New York City, and actually it's all about their block in New York City, because, far be it from anyone to go to across town, but then you've got churches in the Hudson River Valley who say, everything's about New York. Everything's about the city. Nobody really gets us. And I can almost look at any diocesan map and identify the congregation that feels least loved because it's in geographic distance from the diocesan offices. In Kansas, the folks in southeast Kansas never thought the bishop paid enough attention to them never thought that they got really enough from the diocese. It didn't matter, kind of how much time the bishop spent in southeastern Kansas. It always felt like they were the stepchildren. So bishops in the Episcopal Church, unlike anywhere else in the Anglican Communion, are elected by the clergy and laity of the diocese, become members of the House of Bishops of the Episcopal Church, and then just an outline of what we talked about previously. So it was the great St. Augustine who said, "For you, I am a bishop, but with you, I am a Christian. The first is an office accepted. The second is a gift received. One is danger, the other safety. If I am happier to be redeemed with you than to be placed over you, then I shall, as the Lord commanded, be more fully your servant." Presiding Bishop Frank Griswold gave me that quote when I was elected bishop in Kansas, and I keep it near my desk. I think it's a great reminder for not only bishops, but for all leaders in the church. So, what kind of questions do you all have about bishops? And anybody want to correct me on anything that they have taken offense at?
Explain the difference between a bishop and a suffragan bishop.
Yes. The way I remember it is a bishop who's a suffragan. Actually, bishop suffragan is the way we do it. And I call them suffering bishops because they are always going to be kind of the number two person in the diocese, or if you have more than one bishop suffragan, they're the number 3 or number 4 person. So the bishop diocesan is the bishop. Everybody else are bishops that have portfolios, and in some dioceses, bishops suffragan are given extensive responsibilities, and I think that's true here in the Diocese of New York, where Bishop Glasspool and Bishop Shin take different parts of the responsibility and largely cover that part of the portfolio for the diocesan bishop. But if there's ever a disagreement between the two, the diocesan bishop's judgment will supersede the bishop suffragans. They're elected just like a diocesan bishop. There's a convention. They send delegates. The Diocese of New York, again, I'm meddling here a little bit, is in my view, a little skewed to actually smaller churches. St. Bart's, which is a significant player in the life of the diocese in terms of its economic support, we have 3 people going. But a very small church will also have lay delegates, and I think that the mix may need to be looked at. But
Can I just highlight something? We also have assistant bishops.
Yes.
Those are appointed. Technically, Bishop Glasspool is an assistant bishop. She cannot succeed to the right of bishop, but if, heaven forbid, something were to happen to Bishop Andy, Bishop Shin would step into his shoes, absent having a bishop co-tutor, which is the title of the person you'll be electing on Saturday.
And there are a lot, an increasing number of bishops assisting in the Episcopal Church, and some people worry about that because that's a bishop largely that the bishop diocesan can select. You don't know who's going to be elected as a bishop suffragan. So a lot of bishops would prefer to have a bishop assisting, maybe a retired bishop from some other place, because you just have more control over them, and they can be hired and fired more easily. Bishops suffragan, you can't remove them except for canonical reasons.
Dean, we have a number of questions from online viewers.
Sure.
Several people are wondering if you can explain more apostolic succession and how that is determined and measured.
Yeah. I think apostolic succession is more a powerful theological idea than it is something that you can measure and quantify. The idea is that the earliest apostles laid hands on other apostles, and there's a succession of people laying hands on bishops in the apostolic succession to the present day. And I have a big ordination certificate in my office that has each of the bishops that were there who laid hands on me on that day. Actually, I was ordained on the same day that Gene Robinson was ordained. So we could only find like 6 or 7 bishops who weren't going to that ordination. But you know, I'm not bitter. Gene and I have joked about it. But apostolic succession is the reason we have a bishop come when you are confirmed, and the bishop lays hands on your head. And the powerful notion is that that's a line that goes back to the earliest church and to Christ himself. And so if you're a part of a free church tradition or grew up in the Church of the Brethren like I did, nobody talked about apostolic succession. Nobody knew what it was. So it's important to us. It's important to the Roman Catholic Church, to the Orthodox traditions, important, I think, to the Lutherans, less important to some other traditions.
There's also, and I encourage you, if you have questions in the room, Manny has some question cards that you can fill out, and they'll come up to us. We have a question about canonical residence, and if you can explain what that concept is and why it still exists. Why isn't it just that every clergy person in a diocese would vote for the bishop?
Well, a bishop has a lot of authority, and one of the things that bishops have authority over is who will come into the diocese. I've seen this used in ways that I don't think are helpful in dioceses where the bishop had a conservative mindset and was only going to allow people who shared his convictions to come into the diocese and kept everybody else on a pretty short leash. I think that personally, I'd like it better if Peter and Zach were canonically resident in New York. That's where they're doing the work, and I think that the bishop should have oversight over them. But, bishops have not always been kind to same-sex unions. Bishops have not always been kind to single clergy who are dating. And so things that would be not an issue for any other normal human being suddenly becomes a point of contention for clergy. And so one of the things I notice is that my colleagues all want to make sure that they're in a safe place when they make their canonical residence. And I think that's a very wise thing to do. So. Can
you talk about the term coadjutor? What does that mean?
Coadjutor means that you're the co-pilot. It means that there's a period of time where the bishop has retained his authority or her authority, and the new bishop is going to run alongside the diocesan bishop for a period of time until the diocesan bishop thinks that he or she has shared all of his or her wisdom with the young bishop. Of course, you see this all over in business and corporations, right? You know, when somebody leaves GE, nobody else does this. This is crazy. It's expensive. It implies that people can't learn on the job. I served uncomfortably as the coadjutor for 3 months in Kansas. It meant that everybody was saying, "What are you going to do? You're the new bishop. What are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm not in the pilot seat. I can't do a thing." And you can't really say a lot because it seems very disrespectful to the person who is the outgoing bishop. bishop. So it's something that we used to do a lot of, and New York is the reason we have actually a limit on how long somebody can be a coadjutor, because there have been extraordinary times when people have gone several years as the diocesan with the coadjutor, making the coadjutor feel like, what in the world was I thinking? So.
We have lots of questions. I'll try to fit them all in. How can a candidate run for Bishop of New York if they don't live in the region?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's so subtle, because if you run for bishop, nobody likes that. But if nobody knows who you are, you don't get elected. So you try to find ways to write things, post things on your Instagram account, post things so that people will read them. The walkabouts is a very important thing. All of these candidates have gone around the diocese and have met in different places, a group of people, and just did a stand-up question and answer thing.
And you can watch the recordings from these online. We'll put the link in the chat, and on the diocese website, you can watch all the 5 meet and greets that occurred.
Yeah, and it's hard. I think it's a very sensitive dance for candidates for the episcopacy, because if people don't know you, you aren't elected. If people know you want it too much, nobody wants to elect you.
But any priest in the Episcopal Church is eligible. They don't have to be within the diocese. They can come from outside the diocese. Right. And even though we have 4 in the area, 2 are coming from outside of the diocese. One's coming from the Diocese of Connecticut, one's coming from the Diocese of Long Island.
One of the things that's new is that, when I was Bishop of Kansas, which is mid-sized diocese, 52nd out of 111 dioceses in the country, there were 70 candidates for that position. I don't think that they had nearly that many for the Bishop of New York. And we also find on search committees that you have a lot of people who don't have nearly the experience that they should have for a position like that. I don't know, do you know how many people wrote in? Okay.
She's not saying, though.
That's fine. Anyway, the clergy shortage is real. People think in big churches that you're going to have hundreds and hundreds of candidates, and usually that's not the case. Same is true for the diocese.
You didn't talk about the next bishop needing to have a prophetic voice or be an evangelist. Can you talk about those things?
Yeah, it's obviously important. That's a part of the vision for me, is that the bishop have a prophetic voice. But I'll tell you, if a bishop doesn't have a good sense of what's going on right now, he's going to have, or she's going to have, a prophetic voice to know people sitting in the room. I want a bishop who clearly understands where we are in this moment, clearly understands the situation that we're in. It's positive about it, not overwhelmed by it, but is coldly realistic about the kind of resources that diocesan entities are going to have going forward.
This question, and I'm not entirely sure what it's getting at, but can you explain the title of the bishop versus the title of other clergy?
Yeah, the Right Reverend, I thought that was self-explanatory when I was Bishop of Kansas. I said, I'm the Right Reverend, It comes from it's an English honorific, the Right Honorable, and so it's just kind of trying to show status.
Do any of the candidates speak Spanish? And I believe the answer is yes, one of them, Stephen, does.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Who's that?
Stephen Paulikis, who's the rector of All Saints in Park Slope.
So you'll notice that they've tried to have a diversity. They have someone of color. They have a woman. They have someone who's gay. It's really hard for these committees to get the kind of diversity that everybody wants. I think they've done really an extraordinary job in New York to get the kind of diversity that they have. But it's hard to get to check all of the boxes. I had a friend of mine who's the Bishop of Arizona wouldn't ordain anyone who didn't speak Spanish or who wasn't taking Spanish classes. And maybe we're in a moment similar to that. That's Arizona, but I think it could be true in New York.
All right, I'll try to fit 2 more questions in. One
Sure.
is a lot of the candidates, and you have talking about the fact that our systems are broken. How do we hold the candidates accountable once they're bishops to actually change the systems?
Yeah, you pray, because once they're elected, they do whatever they want. I think that there are standing committees that hold the bishop accountable. I think certain clergy, there are opportunities to say, Bishop, you said you were going to do this, but we're not seeing much action on that. When are you going to do something about that? And bishops have to listen to a certain amount of that. But the accountability it's one of the reasons you want to be very careful when you select a bishop, because they're very difficult to remove. We often say they're like federal judges. You try to install them in such a way that they're very hard to remove from office, because you don't want them being afraid so they can be prophetic. In the South, Episcopal bishops in some places, not all, but in some places, showed great courage, in part because they were protected by our polity. They could speak out against segregation, whereas somebody who is in a church that, if the board meets and you're gone, you don't have the same ability to speak prophetically. And that was true of clergy as well. Bishops said, we are not going to remove your rector just because he's talking about something that you find difficult. And that helped us be a power in the civil rights movement.
Many people don't know that you served as vice chair of the House of Bishops. Can you talk a little bit about the diocesan bishops' relationship with the larger church?
Yeah, the House of Bishops meets twice a year. It's a great honor to be asked by Catherine Jeffert Shorey to serve in that capacity. I had to call her back after I'd said yes and say, well, what do I do? But the role of vice president of the House of Bishops is primarily there if something happens to the presiding bishop. You have somebody that can lead part of the church along with the president of the House of Deputies through that interim period.
And on this cheery note, how are bishops removed, if they are removed? You said it's almost impossible to remove them.
Oh my gosh, it's a very extensive process. It involves trial. It involves all kinds of. Not unlike any other kind of trial in the public arena. Some of the same principles are at work in a trial around a bishop, and bishops have been tried for heresy. I'm available for trial anytime somebody wants to take on open communion, because I'm violating one of the canons of the church every Sunday that I say this table is open to everyone. I believe over time that will change, but the church has not been quick to move on that. So, pardon?
Drunk driving.
Drunk driving, yes. A person who had been elected in the Diocese of Maryland killed a bicyclist under the influence and was removed from office, but also incarcerated. So,
yeah, adultery, Stephanie is saying, is another issue. Can you, as we end, Dean, can you talk a little bit, you still are a bishop, once a bishop, always a bishop, but then you took on a role that you don't have to be a bishop to take on. That is relatively rare, but it's happened quite a bit in New York. Can you talk about what it's like to serve as a diocesan bishop and then return to parish ministry and why folks might do that?
Yeah, I'd like to think that I will be a model. There haven't been many bishops who've done this, but there have been some, usually on an interim basis. It's hard to be a rector of a large institution, so often bishops are elected at an older age, and so by the time they're at a point that they would do that, they retire. I was young enough that I thought I had one more big project left in me, and so I had been in the Diocese of Kansas for 14 years. I think many bishops would say the sweet spot for the episcopacy is around 12 years. You notice that university presidents and CEOs are very seldom in positions for more than that. And so I felt like I'd done the things that I went to Kansas to do and was looking for the next challenge. I had no idea how big that challenge would be, but and it's strange when you've been a diocesan bishop, you don't have as many. You have for one the apportionment plan is you don't have an annual stewardship campaign. Now, we did a building campaign in Kansas, and so I spent a lot of time on that, but a lot of bishops don't have that. And I think every bishop and every rector should have a campaign of sorts in their time of service.
Any final words?
Well, it's a great privilege to serve as a bishop. These 5 people, we deserve our prayers. Those who will be electing them deserve our prayers. Alice, who will watch the process, deserves our prayers. It's really an extraordinary way to go about running a railroad. And the Episcopal Church, I think, benefits from our style of leadership, even though it's imperfect and has all kinds of things that invite improvement.
And you can watch the election next Saturday. Is it 10 a.m., Alice? 10 a.m. It's happening at the cathedral. You can watch online. And you can also find out more information about all of the candidates, their recordings from the walkabouts, their own video interviews, resumes at bishopsearch.diocesenewyork.org. Again, that's bishopsearch.dioceseny.org, DIOCESE. You can just Google it too.
Yeah.
So
Great.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you all for being here. We are back next week with Amy Jill Levine, retired from Vanderbilt. She's currently at the Hartford International University, a very famous scholar of the New Testament, and she'll be with us next week here. And we hope you'll join us then. We hope you'll also join us for worship in just a few minutes at 11 a.m.
Thanks, Peter.